So, I haven't uploaded a real video in about 3 months now. Let's fix that. So if you remember a while ago, I made a very long series where I counted down my opinions on Danganronpa characters, and I'll admit my opinions of them have changed a bit since then. However, I'm not going to be redoing that list simply because it would take me too long and it would be too much of an effort. So I wanted to try something a little different, and for the next few days I'm going to be ranking something else: the murders and class trials. I've been seeing a lot of countdowns and ranking lists related to this topic recently, so I decided I'd share my own thoughts. For this series, there are 3 things you need to know. 1, it's strongly opinionated, meaning all the places are based on my own personal thoughts and feelings on these cases, and I would request any feedback you guys can give me. Chances are there are some trials and cases you like way more than I do, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let it be known that even though I talk smack about a lot of these bottom trials, let it be known I don't actually hate any of the Danganronpa cases fully. For every case that's bad, there is something good, and for every good case there are a few flaws. I'm willing to recognise that. When discussing my opinions, I will be taking into account many different aspects of this case, which include important characters, including the victims, the killer, and any other characters involved, such as Himiko in case 3, the chapter, and how enjoyable it is to experience, as well as how well the build-up to the trial is, the investigation, and of course the trial itself. And as an added bonus, I will take the character's execution into account. I hope you're looking forward to this new ride, and I'll have the first part in this video. Of course, I'll be going in descending order, starting with the trial I think is the worst and ending with the one I think is the best. Opinion, the worst trial in the whole series is the 3rd case in Danganronpa V3. No, it's not the 3rd case in the 2nd game, it's this one. Why do I dislike it? Well, there's just so much to dislike about this one for me. Firstly, I really didn't care much for most of the characters involved in this one, and the one character I really did care for, the killer in this case, I feel was completely ruined by the events. On top of that, I get the feeling this case on purposefully tries to avoid doing anything new for the series. But if I'm going to explain why this case offends me so much, then let's start with the characters. Like all other 3rd cases in this series, this one is a double homicide, meaning 2 characters are killed off here. This brings me to my first point, that killing off 2 characters in this chapter was ultimately an unnecessary decision. I'm not saying the double murder was handled as poorly as it was in the 2nd game. In fact, the one single creative thing about this case is heavily tied to that plot point. But it feels like the only reason they killed off 2 characters was because it's basically tradition at this point. The first character who's killed off is Angie.
My name is Angie Yonaga. I'm the ultimate artist.
Angie is pretty important to this chapter because she was going through something similar to an arc at this point. Not a very good one, may I add. I understand that her motivation for telling everyone about how they should stay at the academy instead of trying to murder someone and escape was coming from a very genuine place, which is rare for a character written like she is. I understand that she only wanted the best, but brainwashing half the remaining students into a cult and even going as far as to destroy a flashback light is taking things a little far in my opinion. Honestly, I can understand liking Angie because she's zany and people can probably find her funny, and I'd be lying if I said she wasn't one of the first characters I took an interest in. However, over time I've really analysed Angie's character and realised there's an awful lot about her that really just doesn't click with me. Also, remember what I said about the whole cult thing? That plot point could have easily given her a sadder death, but it didn't. If the likes of Tenko and Shuichi were to put a stop to Angie's antics beforehand, then maybe I would have been a little more upset at her death. But obviously, that didn't happen, so Angie is left with a death that was both pointless and not saddening.
Oh yes! I'm Tenko Chabashira! Yeah! The ultimate Aikido master!
If you watch my original series where I counted down the top 50 Danganronpa characters, then you'd know that Tenko was actually in my bottom 5. But I've had a bit of time to think about it, and I don't think I gave her nearly enough credit. Tenko is, quite honestly, the most redeemable character in this whole scheme. In spite of the fact that her death seemed a little pointless, it's quite possibly the most creative thing to come out of this trial, because her death actually happened during the investigation. The same thing sort of happened to Hifumi in the first game, but this time around, the death, in spite of how many death flags Tenko raised, was pretty surprising, and you wouldn't see it coming the first time around. Not only that, but for a long time now, Tenko was one of my least favourite characters in the whole series, like I said. She's unnecessarily and unironically sexist, and for some reason, people both in the fandom and in the game let her get away with that without ever commenting on it. She's constantly to the point that she threatens people with physical violence for no reason other than the fact that she doesn't like them. However, like I said, Tenko is actually a pretty good character in this chapter. Not only does she show how much she genuinely cared about all the others, particularly Himiko, but her death will always go down in my mind as the saddest death for a character I didn't like.
My name is Korekio Shinguchi. I am called the Ultimate Anthropologist.
This guy. This frigging guy. I hate what the game designers did to him this chapter. Sure, he looks like someone who could kill someone, and that's not breaking character or anything. What is breaking character is basically everything else, from his reaction to his motive to... Now, I've been told many times in the past that Kyo and his sister had a pretty brutal relationship. Trust me, I know. You know what else that relationship is? Incestual. Submissive. That's what. And that's enough to ruin this for me, because that's his motive for murder. I never ever took Kyo for the submissive type, and even though people knock on the other third case as culprits, I can honestly vouch for both Celeste and Mikan in one way. Their motives aren't heavily breaking character. I hate the despair disease, but Mikan killing for the sake of showing her love for despair makes sense after you realise she was a remnant of despair herself, and I really wouldn't put it past Celeste to kill someone for cold hard cash. However, while I will admit it's pretty cool to see a killer kill for a reason other than the motive Monokuma places, that motive has to be good. Kyo isn't the type of character that has appeared psychologically insane, and he also doesn't seem like the submissive type. Also, let me calm down. Also, the way he seems to channel his sister through his body. Actually, no, you know what? I can't calm down. I'm done. My point is, Kyo was originally a character that I paid a lot of interest to, since he genuinely is cool and interesting, and he remains that way after his death in some ways. But this case, and just this case, upsets me so much because it made me hate him.
Prepare to be amazed. Fall to your knees. I am Himiko Yumeno, the ultimate mage. But I'm officially called the ultimate magician.
The only other character involved in this conflict is Himiko, who was the most upset over both Tenko and Angie's deaths, since they were basically her best friends at this point, well, at least Angie was, and she's also the prime suspect for the one who killed her. Not only can the game not come up with anything new and fun for this case, but they end up redoing plot points from the previous chapters. Himiko was also the prime suspect for a small chunk of the second trial, and sure, her name is cleared within the first quarter, but still! Normally I wouldn't mind redoing the whole prime suspect thing, but in the very least do it for a different character. Now, there's one thing here that I have a problem with, and it doesn't necessarily involve the game, it involves the fandom. And I need to ask you all something pretty important, and that is, can you please stop hating on Himiko? I can understand that Himiko's redemption arc didn't start off incredibly well, not nearly as good as Fuyuhiko's, but that's no reason to treat her like a bad character. After this point, she becomes a pretty serious character, and if you were to ask me, I think Himiko really did care for Tenko. I know it seems a little weird that she only realised how much happiness Tenko gave after she died, but personally, I get the feeling that Himiko always valued Tenko's company and simply didn't realise it. The Chapter 3 trial sucked, but the third chapter of the game in general was okay. It had good points and bad points. On one hand, it had a pretty engaging story right from the get-go, with the cast feeling pretty tense around Maki after finding out she was an assassin, and watching Kaito force his help onto her was pretty entertaining. Also, in spite of some of the things that she did, I won't deny I was happy to see Angie get so much screen time this chapter, since she really deserved it. And, like I already said, this chapter really lifted some of the doubt and detest I had surrounding Tenko. She did some pretty nice things this chapter, such as trying to help Shuichi and Himiko with their problems by throwing them, but still. However, on the other hand, there are a lot of problems with this chapter too. The main issue is that there's a lot of plot points, and some of them just flat out don't go anywhere. As I already mentioned, Angie's student council cult situation doesn't get cleared up before Kyo kills her. Secondly, the motive for this chapter is a Necronomicon that can somehow bring a dead student back to life, but that gets taken away before anyone can do anything with it. Something like this could have easily changed the dynamic of the usual motives you get. No motive in the series perfectly replicates one that's already been done, not even the V3 Chapter 2 motive videos, which had the interesting spin of getting mixed up, with Kirumi being the only one who got hers. However, we don't get to see this dynamic in Chapter 3 because the Necronomicon is nothing more than a clue for the murder. Another big plot point of this chapter is how Monodame seems to stage something like a coup and uses the Exosols to overthrow Monokuma from power. Monokuma then proceeds to take back his spot of power after Tenko dies without any resistance. And there's one more big plot point that doesn't go anywhere, and I might be cheating with this one since it's part of the trial for the most part. But the biggest plot twist or point or idea that doesn't go anywhere is the new ideas of the double murder twist. Monokuma brings up something surrounding the double murder scenario that the previous two games never mentioned. If there are two murders and two killers, then only the first killer receives punishment. Meaning, hypothetically, if there were two killers, only the one who murdered the first victim, Angie in this case, would be punished, while the one who murdered Tenko would walk free. This means that potentially, someone who everyone knows is a killer could become part of their daily lives, walking around as free as a bird, and that would undoubtedly create a hell of a lot of tension for the remaining cast, but no. That never happens, because the devs decided to take the easy way out and made Korekiyo Shinguji both killers. He killed Angie and he killed Tenko. Missed opportunity 101, and maybe, in spite of his motive, that could save Kyo from being one of my most hated characters, and unfortunately, he never got that chance. Okay, if I'm being honest with everyone and myself, this investigation and the clue gathering, as well as the mystery and speculation, was pretty damn awesome. It's interesting to a fault, and unlike most cases in this series, doesn't feel like much of a wild goose chase. It's not my favourite investigation sequence in the series, but it's at least second or third. There never was a moment where I felt like looking for clues was a waste of time, and there's several amazing moments that happen during it that are really memorable, including, but not limited to, the possibility of two killers, which as I said goes nowhere, but still it's there, the fake death scene of Kokichi, which is hilarious, and of course, the murder of Tenko, which happens during it. I never ever thought I'd see so many great opportunities thrown away for the sake of a goddamn seesaw. Although, that part admittedly is the one part of the trial I actually enjoyed figuring out. V3 in particular has some really creative ways of killing people that you'd never be able to figure out from just a first glance like you would in the previous two games. This is the same game where someone gets drowned in a sink and fed to piranhas, and where someone is strangled to death with toilet paper. But we'll get to those cases eventually. Kyo's method of killing Tenko is just as creative and has become a rightful meme in the fandom, which involves him using the Saiyan setup to his advantage, putting Tenko under a cage and lifting her body up with a seesaw effect to have her be stabbed in the neck with a sickle. However, being a meme doesn't save you from being a generally bad mystery game case. One of the biggest issues I have with the trial in general is its pacing is terrible. In fact, it's worse than the third case of the second game. And the reason for all this is because of the one thing everyone is already familiar with just from this video. The biggest issue with this whole case is the fact that it's a double murder case. The one thing with the double murder idea is that there's always a risk that putting the deaths of two people into a single case can lead to at least one of those people being put to the side until the last second. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happens in this case. The characters spend not even 10 minutes talking about Angie, immediately jumping to Tenko and only going back to Angie after everyone remembers, oh wait, we should have been talking about Angie's murder to start with. Game 3 Case 3 is the worst offender of that idea, and that's just another reason, more so the prime one, why it's not good. For me, Kyo's execution is up there as one of the worst in the series. It makes sense and relates to his talent, but it's an incredibly unsatisfying ending for a very dissatisfying trial. It upsets me every time I see Monodam, arguably my favourite Monocub, commit suicide like that randomly due to his siblings' oppression of him, and the fact that Kyo's own sister, whom as a reminder he committed the murder for in the first place, is ultimately the one who ends him, it just makes his motive and his whole career even worse than it already is. But that's the end of this video. I hated this case, but I try and find redeemable aspects about it. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and like and subscribe if you enjoyed, whether you agree with me or not. And I'll see you tomorrow where I talk about yet another bad case.